Hey, what's going on, gang? Welcome to your 10th Git and GitHub tutorial, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to GitHub. Okay then, so what the hell is GitHub? Well, basically it's a service that's going to let us set up hosted repositories, or as they're known, remote repositories. And that means that they're stored online by GitHub. So anyone with a computer and internet access can go and then see this repository online and see the code in it, right? Now this is really cool because it means we can really effectively work in teams on a project. So imagine this scenario. There's 4 developers and we've each got our own computer in the office, or maybe we're all remote workers, I don't know. Either way, we all want to work on a project together. So we decide to set up this project, this repository for this project online in GitHub. Okay, so now we have this kind of central repository which we can all access from our own computers. And what we can do is clone this repository into our own computers. So now we all have a local version of this repository and we can all work on that code in our own time. Now imagine one of us, person 1 over here, starts to develop a new feature. So they develop it locally on their computer in the local version of their repository. Then when they're happy with it, what they can do is push their code up to the hosted repository to update the code right here and merge it to the master branch in this repository. Then these other 3 people, they can take a look at this code and say, okay, well, I'm going to now pull that code down from the hosted repository to update my local version of it. So now they have the new feature on their local computer. So we're all staying in sync with the main code base. And it's a really good way to collaborate this way, so we can all work on features in our own time, push up the code, and the other developers pull down the code, and we can work together really effectively. Alright then, so if we're going to start using GitHub, then I guess it makes sense that we need a GitHub account. So you want to head to github.com to create one. You need to choose a username, an email, and a password. Then just click this button right here. That, my friends, is going to take you to some kind of welcome screen which doesn't look like this, because I've already signed up and I've already got 25 repos on the go, most of which are just course files for playlists on this YouTube channel. Anyway, we don't care about any of that. What we want to do is make a new remote repository right here on GitHub, right? And I'm going to show you 2 ways we can do that. Now, the first way is going to assume that we already have some kind of local repository set up or some kind of project on our local computer with a repository in it. And we might get midway through that project and then decide that we want to collaborate with the wider world, other developers, and we want to upload all of that code to GitHub to a remote repository so that these other developers around the world can view that code, download it onto their computers, and work on it as well. So that's the first case scenario, assuming we've already started a project and have a local repo already. The second case scenario is going to assume we don't have a local repo and we've not started the project yet. So then what we do is create the repo on GitHub first, a remote one, then clone that to our computer before we start work on it. And this, I think, is the better option if you've not started a project yet. Create it on GitHub first, then clone it to your computer. Anyway, I'll show you both methods just in case. So first of all, we already have some kind of project and repo set up on our local machine, which we do because we've been working on it in previous tutorials. So it's this Git1 repo right here. This is what we want to push up now to a new remote repository on GitHub. So what I'm going to do is click on this new button, but if you've just signed up, you might not see this new button. You might see a welcome screen with a bigger button that says create your first repository. Either way, click it because all roads lead to Rome. Or rather, all GitHub buttons lead to this page. Anyway, we need to give this repo a name, and I'm going to call it Git1 just for synchronicity because that matches up to what our local one is called. Now we can give this a description if we want, however, I'm super lazy and I can't be bothered. So this can either be public or private. Now public means that anyone can see this repository. So if that's the case, then just be careful about what you upload to GitHub. We can also have a private one if we have a premium account. Now that costs about $7 a month, but for now we're just going to keep this public anyway. We can initialize this repo with a README file if we want to. Now a README file might be some information about the repository that you might find on other people's repositories. For example, a library. It's going to tell you about that library and how to use it. We don't really need one for now, so I'm not going to add one. Anyway, We can also add a .gitignore file. Remember, I taught you about those in a previous tutorial, and it comes baked GitHub with all of these different options for a gitignore file. For example, if we have a node project, then we can use the node gitignore file. I'm not going to do that though, we don't need one. So we can also add a license if we want, but again, can't be bothered with any of that. I'm just going to create this repository. Okay, so this is going to set up that remote repository for us on GitHub. Now it's going to direct you to this page and give you some kind of quick setup instructions. You can follow those or you can trust me. Right, so this here is the URL to your kind of Git repository online. I'm going to copy that because we're going to need it in a bit. To do that, just click this button. Okay, now what we want to do is go to our local repository. Now, the aim here is to push all of this code here, this local repository, up to our remote repository. And we can do that really easily. First of all, I'm going to make sure that I've not changed anything and there's nothing left to commit. To do that, I'm just going to say git status. Okay, everything's clean, fine, we're good to go. Now, to push this code up to the remote repo, what we need to do is say git and then push. That's the keyword for pushing code up. Then we want to say where we want to push to. Now, I'm going to paste in this URL because that's the repo that we're pushing to, right? Then we want to say which branch we want to push up. We're going to push up the master branch. Now, you can push up other branches as well, and we're going to do that in later tutorials. For now, let's just push up this master branch. So if you click enter now, it might just take 10 seconds or something like that to gather all of your code and push it up to GitHub, all right? Then we get this feedback message right here, which is basically saying that everything is done, and we've got this new branch now, master, on the remote repository. Cool, so that's all gone up, and if we take a look now at this remote repository, then we should, if we click on the repository name right here, then we should see all of that code. Cool. So now another developer could come to this URL right here, see this repository, and they could see this code. And if they wanted to see, for example, the index file, they could just click on it and they can see that HTML. And also, if they wanted to clone this to their computer, they can come to here and clone it. And I'm going to show you how we can do that in a second. We can also see the commit history. So when we push to GitHub, we also put the push the commit history, which is really cool. So we can see everything we've done in the past, and we can click on each one of these commits to see more information about it. Also, we can see the branches. If we just click on Git 1 again, we can see the branches. Currently, it's just one branch, which is the master branch. Okay, we can also access the branches here as well. And like I said, we'll cover branches in probably the next tutorial. For now, we have basically pushed all of our existing code in our existing repo up to a new remote repository, okay, which is really cool. Now, I want to show you something. Say, for example, we want to make some changes and then push up the changes to this repo. Let's do that. Let's just add something in, a H1 for example. H1 and just say whatevs. Right, okay, really original. Now then, what we want to do is say git add, first of all, to add these to the staging area. We're still committing in exactly the same way to our local repository first of all. So we'll commit this with a message and added H1. Then what we're going to do is push all this again. So remember, it's git push, then the repo name. Now I could copy, or rather just paste that in again and then say we want to push up the master. But you know what, every time we make a push, I don't want to be typing in this thing right here. It doesn't make any sense to keep this copied to my clipboard all the time. Instead, what we can do is we can set up an alias in this repository to say what this URL is going to be. So we only have to type out one little word instead of all of this big URL. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the way we do that is by saying git remote, right? This stands for remote repositories, and then we want to add a remote repository. Then what we're going to do is give this remote repository an alias. Now the default one in GitHub is origin, and many people use this, so I'm going to use it as well. So this is going to be the alias of this repository. Then we need to type in the repository name, so I'll just paste that in and I'll click enter. And that is going to add this alias to this local repo. So now instead of typing git push and then the whole URL, I can just say git push origin, which is now associated with this URL because this is the alias for it. And then I can say which branch, master. So now it's going to do exactly the same thing, but it's just easier to push now. Okay, So again, it's pushed everything up, and if we check this out in GitHub and refresh, we should see now that there's 9 commits, and we've just added a new commit, which is added h1. Cool. And hopefully the index should have updated as well. Yep, whatevs. Therefore, we've pushed it up to this remote repository, and other developers viewing this can see those updated files as well. Cool, right? Okay, so I did say I was going to show you 2 ways of doing it, and the second method assumes we don't already have a local repository. So let's now create a new repository. So I'm going to go to my profile first of all, and then we'll go to repositories and create a new one again. So it's all starting in the same way. So again, we need to give this a repository name. So I'm just going to call this crap-portfolio. All right, cool. Again, not going to give this a description. It's going to be public, and this time I will add a README file. Okay, so I'm going to create this repository this time, and I'm adding this README file because I'm creating it from scratch. I've not got anything existing on my computer, so when I sync this to my computer and clone it, then it's going to download this README file as well, so everything's going to be in sync. Now I'm going to create this repository. It's going to do exactly the same thing. This time it directs me here, and you can see we've got this README file first of all, and that's just the one commit, the initial commit to add this README file, so that's the only history. Just the one branch as well, which is master. So now what we want to do is we want to clone this repository to our computer so we can start work on it. Now then, to do that, click this button, clone or download. And again, this is the URL right here to this remote repository. So you want to click this button to copy it to your clipboard. Now, if we go down here to the code, what I want to do is close off this. I'm just going to click off the index file as well. I want to go up a directory because we're creating a new repository now. I don't want to create it within this existing one. So I'm going to say cd for change directory, ... to go up a level. Then I want to clone my repository right here. Okay, so how do we do that? Dead simple. We say git clone, and then we paste in this URL that we just copied. This is the remote repo we just made. So if we click enter now, you can see it's saying cloning crap portfolio. Cool. So now we have a crap portfolio locally. So I can navigate into that by saying cd crap-portfolio, and now we're inside this repository locally now. We've cloned it, so it's now local on our computer. Okay, so what I'm going to do over here is just add this project directory. So I'm going to go to file and then add project folder, go to recording, and then go to crap portfolio, which is just created by cloning. And now you can see this repo right now has a README file as well. Okay, cool. So now let's make some kind of commit to this and upload it. So what I'll do is right click over here and add a new file. This is going to be called index.html. And let's just make the bare bones of a HTML title. We'll call this crap portfolio and save it. And then down here, what we want to do is add this now and commit it locally first of all. So we'll say git add to add it to staging, then git commit with a message, and the message is going to be added index file. Then what we want to do is push this up to the remote repo. Now, remember last time we had to specify an alias for the remote repository. We had to say git add remote and then origin and then the link to the repository. Now we don't have to do this time, and that's because we've cloned it down from GitHub. So this repo already has set up the origin alias for us. That happens when we clone it, right? And we can tell that by saying git remote and then -v. And that tells us right here, if I just expand this a little bit, we can see right here we've got origin for fetch and pushing. So pushing is what we're doing to push up, fetch is what you do to bring code down sometimes, okay? So now what we can do is push up to the origin because it's already stored here. So I can say git push origin, and we want to push up the master branch. So this is going to take this master branch and push it up now to the remote repository. So it might take a second. Okay, cool, it's done that, and let's check out the repo over here. And if we refresh now, we should see that updated commit. Now we've got 2 commits, and we see that index file right here. Cool. So everything is working. So there we go, my friends. That is how we set up remote repositories on GitHub. So in the next tutorial, what we're going to do is take this one step further, and I'm going to show you how we start collaborating on GitHub, imagining there's 2 or 3 developers working on a project, how we're going to push code up in different branches and pull that code down again.